Brutal fight between Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris after the Austrian Grand Prix. If you want to know how the argument ended, stay tuned, this video is for you. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Just moments after the checkered flag waved at the Canadian Grand Prix, a highly charged and escalating drama unfolded behind closed doors, one that had been silently brewing from the very first lap. What appeared on the surface to be just another hard-fought Formula One race quickly unraveled into a deeply personal and emotional conflict between two of Britain's most prominent drivers, Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris. Though no major incident had been flagged during the race itself, a seemingly innocuous moment in Turn 1 set off a chain reaction of frustration, resentment, and confrontation that would boil over in front of stunned McLaren personnel and a handful of bewildered paddock insiders. The origin of the dispute traced back to the opening seconds of the race, when Norris, having secured a rare and hard-earned pole position, led the grid into the first corner. Behind him, Hamilton launched off the line with characteristic aggression and precision, threading his Mercedes expertly between the slower starters and positioning himself for a move into Turn 1. As the pack bunched up into the tight first apex, Norris applied the brakes a split second earlier than Hamilton had anticipated, his decision likely influenced by tire temperatures, defensive positioning, and the weight of leading the pack into the chaos of the opening corner. But for Hamilton, who had committed to a late braking approach to capitalize on his blistering start, the earlier braking caught him off guard. In a flash, the nose of the Mercedes clipped the diffuser of Norris's McLaren. The contact was light, almost imperceptible to the spectators, but enough to unsettle the airflow and introduce a subtle but performance-sapping imbalance in Hamilton's front wing structure. The incident was not flagged by race control. No yellow flags, no steward's investigation, not even a note in the post-race review documents. It was, in the eyes of the FIA, a racing incident too minor to merit intervention. But inside the cockpit of car number 44, the impact was felt both mechanically and emotionally. Within seconds of the contact, Hamilton's voice crackled through the team radio, an unmistakable edge in his tone. "He braked early, man. I had nowhere to go," he reported sharply. His race engineer, ever composed, responded with a calming directive: "Copy, Lewis. Let's focus on managing the tires. We'll review the data after. Car looks okay for now." But Hamilton's growing irritation wasn't so easily soothed. The next few laps saw him struggle for balance and grip, particularly through the medium-speed right-handers where the aerodynamic damage was most punishing. By lap 17, his frustration could no longer be masked. "The balance is all over the place. Feels like I've got understeer into every right-hander," he reported, his voice rising. Telemetry confirmed a reduction in downforce consistent with light structural compromise to the front wing's left-hand element. Though the damage wasn't severe enough to warrant a pit stop, it hampered Hamilton's ability to push during key strategy windows. While Norris settled into a steady rhythm, controlling the race from the front with clinical precision, Hamilton found himself stuck in traffic, battling midfield cars with a car that simply wouldn't respond to setup adjustments. Strategy gambles failed to yield gains, and despite his experience and grit, Hamilton was forced to settle for a lackluster P9 finish, a result far below the expectations set by his blistering qualifying performance. The race had been run, the points allocated, but Hamilton's frustration remained raw. As the drivers exited their cars and parked firm, Hamilton pulled off his gloves and helmet with stiff, deliberate movements. His eyes scanned the paddock, not for fans or reporters, but for the man in orange who he felt had cost him the chance at a podium, or more. He bypassed the standard media pen entirely, ignoring questions from Sky Sports pit lane correspondent and brushing past a PR handler who attempted to redirect him toward the cool-down room. Determined, Hamilton strode directly toward the McLaren garage, every step laced with the intensity of a man who felt wronged and unacknowledged. Inside the McLaren area, Lando Norris stood beside his race engineer, discussing the final sector delta between laps 41 and 52, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, of the storm approaching. Hamilton didn't wait for pleasantries or permission. He stepped into the circle of engineers and asked, sharply but controlled, "What the hell was that at Turn 1?" The tone was unmistakably confrontational, not shouted but deliberate, designed to cut through the noise and demand accountability. Norris turned slowly, caught mid-sentence, and offered a smirk that seemed more habitual than intentional, but to Hamilton, it landed like provocation. "Mate, you should have braked earlier. I was in front." "That's on you, not me," Norris replied, his voice casual but with a defensive edge that only heightened the tension. For a moment, silence hung in the air between them. Hamilton's jaw tightened. He took a half step forward and pointed to the McLaren's rear wing. "You changed your line and then slammed the brakes. You knew I was right there. That wasn't clean racing, that was reckless." McLaren's staff began to shift uncomfortably. A mechanic looked toward a team liaison, who discreetly gestured toward a nearby partition, as if to suggest the conversation be moved out of public view. But neither driver budged. Norris, refusing to back down, replied, "I was managing my entry. You want to talk reckless? Look at how deep you dive into turn 1 every race. This time it bit you." The back and forth drew quiet attention from surrounding teams. A Ferrari engineer paused by the hospitality area to observe, and a Red Bull staffer discreetly pulled out a phone, though it remained at his side. Hamilton took a breath, composed himself, but his eyes stayed locked on Norris. "You're fast, no doubt," he said slowly, "but one day you'll learn that leading a race means more than just staying ahead, it's about responsibility." Norris raised his eyebrows. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just not used to seeing someone else up front." That final jab was enough for Hamilton to break eye contact. He turned, shook his head, and walked off in silence, leaving Norris to exhale, visibly releasing some of the pressure he hadn't shown until now. The incident didn't make it into the post-race press conference. When asked about turn 1, both drivers offered vague, diplomatic answers. "Just racing," Norris said with a shrug. "Things got tight." Hamilton replied, "We'll review it internally." But within the paddock, the altercation was the talk of the evening. Team principals from both camps were reportedly involved in a quiet sit-down later that night to ensure the dispute didn't escalate into a public feud. Toto Wolff declined to comment, but insiders noted his tone was unusually curt in the post-race debrief. Andrea Stella, for his part, praised Norris for his composure but acknowledged that when you're racing champions, tensions are inevitable. What remains uncertain is whether this flashpoint was a one-off emotional reaction or the beginning of a deeper rift. With both drivers likely to contend for top positions throughout the season, and with Hamilton nearing the end of his career while Norris continues to rise, the stage may be set for an ongoing rivalry, one charged not only with the desire to win but with the weight of legacy, pride and mutual resentment left unresolved. Hamilton's jaw clenched tightly, the muscles in his face twitching as he took in Norris's response. The tension between the two drivers was now radiating like static electricity, drawing the eyes and ears of every team member, mechanic, and media personnel within range. His voice, normally measured and calm, was beginning to carry a sharper, more cutting tone as the fire in his chest built from indignation. "Don't talk to me like that," he snapped, stepping in close enough for his breath to be felt. "You cut in like I wasn't even there. There's a difference between aggressive and reckless, and what you pulled wasn't even close to clean. That wasn't racing, it was amateur hour." Norris didn't flinch. If anything, he straightened up, his arms still crossed, eyes narrowing with irritation and resolve. "You're calling me amateur? Coming from the guy who's been protected his whole career by stewards and politics. I race hard and fair. If you can't handle pressure in the first few corners, maybe it's time to admit you're not used to someone actually defending their position without bowing down to your name." That struck a nerve. Hamilton's nostrils flared slightly, a telltale sign for those who had been around him long enough to know he was on the edge. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, barely resisting the urge to point directly at Norris. "You've got no idea what you're talking about. You think you're the only young driver who's ever challenged someone up front? You think I got to where I am by expecting people to move out of my way? No. I earned every inch. But what you did was dangerous. You chopped me with zero warning. I had no space, and I couldn't vanish." Norris leaned forward slightly now, matching Hamilton's proximity, the air between them thick with unspoken rage and clashing egos. "You always pull this, acting like any challenge to you is dirty driving. You weren't alongside me going into that apex. You stuck your nose in late, hoping I'd leave the door open. I didn't. That's racing. You gambled, and it didn't pay off. Don't come whining to me like I'm supposed to accommodate your every move because of your resume." By this point, team radio engineers were subtly moving closer, murmuring into headsets, relaying the unfolding drama to their respective walls. Papaya uniforms started gathering discreetly behind Norris while a few Mercedes personnel stood rigidly behind Hamilton, forming an unspoken divide in the paddock. Andrea Stella cautiously stepped in between them, raising both hands in a gesture of restraint, though neither driver was ready to de-escalate. "Enough, both of you," Stella said with forced calm, glancing between the two like a man trying to defuse a bomb with shaking hands. "This is not the place." But Hamilton wasn't done. He took a half-step past Stella's arm, speaking directly over him. "You think this is how you earn respect in this sport? By chopping your fellow drivers at 300 kilometers per hour and playing innocent afterward? I've seen it before. Talented drivers who think they've made it because they're fast, but without discipline, it means nothing. You'll be another what could have been if you keep this up." Norris's jaw tightened as he exhaled through his nose. He clearly wanted to walk away but stood his ground, eyes locked on Hamilton's. "Save the lectures. I'm not trying to be you. I'm trying to be the best me. If that rattles you, that's your problem. Maybe it's hard watching the next generation drive like they're not afraid of you." That stung more than either would admit. Hamilton didn't blink, but the silence that followed felt like a pressure drop in the room. Norris's words had landed, and everyone knew it. A beat passed before Hamilton spoke again, quieter, but with steel in his voice. "If you want to fight like a top driver, then drive like one. Not like someone who's still proving they belong." "You'll see," Norris shot back. "I don't need your approval. But if you keep expecting the grid to bow down, you're going to keep getting surprised." The air around them was practically humming with anticipation. A few journalists nearby had already started taking notes. Cameras were being subtly raised, lenses trained on what could be the beginning of a fierce, lasting rivalry between two generations. For all the mutual disdain in their voices, there was also recognition. Both drivers knew they were no longer just dealing with an on-track incident. This was symbolic. It was a generational standoff. And neither of them was backing down. Behind them, Zach Brown appeared briefly, catching Stella's eye with a subtle shake of the head. This wasn't going away. Not with two drivers who had no intention of yielding, not on track, not in the garage, and certainly not in a confrontation like this. Hamilton finally turned and walked off, leaving a faint trail of tension in his wake, helmet still clutched in one hand, jaw tight, eyes forward. Norris stood for a few more seconds, then finally let his arms drop to his sides, taking a deep breath before turning away in the opposite direction. But neither of them would forget this moment. And neither would the paddock. Security personnel, already stationed at strategic corners of the paddock for crowd control, began moving in closer the moment tensions between the two drivers escalated. A Mercedes liaison, eyes darting between Lewis Hamilton and the visibly agitated Lando Norris, moved with greater urgency, clearly sensing that things were about to take a turn for the worse. Several other team members, both from Ferrari and McLaren, followed suit, acting on instinct more than any direct orders, realizing that this confrontation wasn't just a heated post-race exchange. It was the manifestation of weeks, if not months, of simmering tension. As the voices of the drivers rose above the murmuring paddock, more crew members surrounded them, attempting to form a physical barrier. Neither driver was particularly volatile in nature, but the raw emotion of the moment had pushed them to a breaking point. They were now face to face, barely a foot apart, exchanging sharp words that were just out of earshot for the cameras, but enough to alarm those closest. Several paddock staff braced themselves, unsure whether this would end in a verbal spat or something more physical. Hamilton's jaw was clenched, and his eyes bore into Norris's with a mixture of disbelief and fury, while Norris's body language suggested defiance more than regret. The tension finally broke when each driver was physically steered away by members of their respective entourages. But as they were being separated, each glanced back over their shoulder, Hamilton with a bitter scowl, and Norris with a half-smirk that suggested he wasn't entirely remorseful. The eye contact they exchanged in that moment was more telling than any of their words. It wasn't just a disagreement about a non-track incident, it was personal now. And anyone who witnessed it firsthand could sense it. This rivalry had crossed a line, and the fallout would ripple through the paddock for weeks to come. Less than an hour after the incident, with the media frenzy still unfolding outside, Hamilton asked for a one-on-one meeting with Vasseur. The request was direct, unambiguous, and urgent. No press, no engineers, just him and the man in charge. Vasseur, who had been monitoring the fallout from a hospitality area while fielding multiple calls from sponsors and media personnel, immediately agreed, sensing the gravity of Hamilton's tone. The two retreated to the far end of the Ferrari motorhome, into a private room that was used occasionally for high-level strategy meetings or sensitive conversations. It was soundproofed, isolated, and guarded by a discreet but vigilant Ferrari security staffer outside the door. Inside, Hamilton didn't waste time with pleasantries. His body language spoke volumes before he even opened his mouth. Arms crossed, shoulders tense, foot tapping anxiously. He was still in his race suit, unzipped halfway, the sweat from the race mixing with the adrenaline of the confrontation. "Fred, we've got to take this up with the FIA," Hamilton began, his voice low but intense. That move by Lando, completely reckless. He lifted early, deliberately. It wasn't just poor judgment, it was calculated. I had nowhere to go. He compromised everything we planned today. The entire race was flipped because of that. And what's worse is we just sat on our hands. No response. No message to race control. Nothing. Vasseur, who had heard multiple interpretations of the incident already from his engineers and race strategists, took a measured breath before responding. "Lewis, I understand your frustration. Trust me, I do. I watched the replay more than a dozen times already. We've got the telemetry from both cars. But from the steward's perspective, and from the live footage, it's ambiguous at best. It's the kind of move that's always going to fall into that gray area." Hamilton stepped forward, a rare edge to his voice now unmistakable. "Gray area? Fred, come on. That wasn't some split-second misjudgment. Look at the data again. Our delta shows he lifted earlier than at any point in previous laps. That wasn't a corner you lift into, not under normal circumstances. He was trying to bait me. He wanted contact. And he nearly got it. You think that's just aggressive racing?" The Frenchman kept his composure but didn't meet Lewis's eyes right away. "We saw the same data, yes. But you also know how these things play out. Filing a protest post-race requires overwhelming evidence, something the FIA can't dispute. And in this case, we didn't have that. Filing with what we had, especially outside the official time window, would have exposed us. What if they threw it out as a frivolous complaint? It could damage our credibility, even get us penalized. The regulations are clear about late submissions." Hamilton's frustration bubbled over. "So we just let it go? We send the message that it's okay to play games like that at 300 kilometers per hour? We say nothing, and he does it again next week. Maybe worse, maybe with someone else. Maybe it ends in carbon fiber across the track or something far more serious. I'm telling you, Fred, we need to set a precedent. This is about safety, not just championship points." Vasseur finally leaned forward, elbows on the table, speaking with the calm tone of someone trying to prevent a fire from spreading. "We're not ignoring this. But we also have to be strategic. There are other avenues. We can raise it in the next driver's briefing. We can speak to the stewards privately and flag this as a trend. We can get our engineers to present the data in a context that pushes for clarity on defensive moves under braking zones." Hamilton shook his head, clearly dissatisfied. "That's not good enough. If the roles had been reversed, if I had done that to him, I guarantee McLaren would have filed immediately. They'd have been on the radio to race control before my car even made it to turn 4. We can't keep playing nice when others are out here bending the rules. I came here to win. And I need to know that this team has my back when the racing gets dirty." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Vasseur didn't reply immediately. Instead, he looked at Hamilton carefully, weighing his next words with caution. Finally, he offered a quiet nod. "We'll escalate it. Not formally to the FIA, not now, but internally. And I'll make sure it's raised in the next Grand Prix Commission meeting. But Lewis, understand this. If we go down this road, it's not just about Lando anymore. We open ourselves to scrutiny. Every move you make will be reviewed with the same lens. Are you prepared for that?" Hamilton didn't hesitate. "I already am." Then he turned toward the door, leaving Vasseur alone with the implications of everything that had just been said. That response from the team principal did absolutely nothing to ease the storm building within Lewis Hamilton. If anything, it ignited a deeper layer of discontent that had been brewing beneath the surface since the opening rounds of the season. His voice, though measured in tone during post-race debriefs, barely masked the intensity behind his words. He had spent years in the sport, fighting for every tenth of a second, building championships from consistency, and pushing machinery beyond its design limits. But this pattern of delayed decisions, missed opportunities, and what he perceived as an erosion of trust, was intolerable. We waited too long. Again. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke into the recorder, eyes narrowed with frustration. This is the second time this season where something crucial has happened and we've hesitated, just waited and watched instead of acting. I need to know when I bring something up mid-race, when I say it's urgent, the team is listening, not calculating. If we'd acted when I first mentioned it, if we'd been proactive, the FIA would have had to review it. There's no guarantee of a penalty, but we'd be in the conversation. Instead, we're invisible. Again. What wasn't said in that moment said even more. The disappointment wasn't just technical, it was personal. Hamilton's bond with his teams throughout his career had always been about more than lap times and strategy calls. It was about trust, about mutual understanding. He wasn't just another driver. He was a leader, a veteran, a 7-time world champion who had earned the right to be listened to. Later that afternoon, away from the media glare and the swarming microphones, Hamilton found himself seated across from Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari hospitality unit. They had deliberately chosen a quiet, shaded table at the very back, just beyond earshot of most team personnel, but still within the protective boundaries of the paddock. There, stripped of media niceties and sponsor obligations, they spoke as two drivers bearing the weight of a team that was under-delivering. Hamilton leaned forward, elbows resting heavily on the polished metal table, his fingers interlocked tightly. He was speaking in low, deliberate tones, but his eyes burned with intensity. "The engine just doesn't feel right this season," he muttered, almost like he didn't want to admit it aloud. "I don't know if it's the mapping, the hybrid deployment, or something deeper in the software architecture, but it doesn't respond the way I need it to out of the slow corners. It's not giving me what I need to rotate and launch." Leclerc, resting his chin on one hand, nodded slowly. His voice was calm but weighted with similar concern. "Yeah, it's not just you. I've been feeling the same thing since Jeddah. There's something wrong with how the torque comes in. It's not linear. Last year, the delivery was so much smoother, especially out of turns 3 or 11. Now it's like," he paused, searching for the right words, "like we have power, but not where it counts. The spec sheet says we're competitive, but the throttle tells a different story." Hamilton exhaled heavily, running a hand across his face as if to wipe away the frustration building in his chest. "And the top end? Sure, the car's got some grunt on the straights, I'll give it that. But that doesn't help if we're losing traction at the exits. Every time I try to get the jump out of a tight hairpin, I'm either understeering wide or lighting up the rears. I can't defend, can't attack. It's like I'm dancing on a tightrope with no balance." His tone grew sharper as the memory of the race replayed in his mind, each frame more infuriating than the last. And today? Today was just everything going wrong at once. The front end was washed out by lap 3, the engine lagged through the critical phases of throttle, and then Lando being reckless again, diving late like it's lap 1 of a junior formula. Leclerc raised his eyebrows. "You think he overstepped?" Hamilton didn't hesitate. "Of course, he did. He braked 20 meters too late and then tried to pin it on me like I turned in too soon. There's a difference between racecraft and desperation. He's talented, no doubt, but that kind of move just shows a lack of maturity. And the stewards? Silent. No review. Nothing. It's like they've decided certain drivers get more leeway." The two sat in silence for a few moments, letting the heaviness settle around them like the thick Mediterranean air. From a distance, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses from the front of the hospitality unit felt almost surreal, like it belonged to a different world entirely. One where Ferrari was winning races instead of dissecting why they couldn't compete at the sharp end of the grid. Leclerc finally broke the silence. "Do you think it's structural? Something deeper than just setup or aero?" Hamilton turned his gaze toward the distant horizon of the circuit, where the final corner shimmered under the late afternoon sun. "Maybe. I've been thinking about that too. It's like we've been optimizing the wrong philosophies. Chasing wind tunnel numbers instead of driver feedback. We've made progress, sure, but not the kind that wins titles. Not the kind that instills confidence when you're going wheel to wheel at 300k. There was a long pause, filled only by the distant hum of activity and the occasional call from a team engineer checking logistics. Then Hamilton added, more quietly, "I didn't come here to finish 5th. I joined Ferrari because I believed there was a project, a vision, a promise of excellence. But now? It feels like we're reacting instead of leading. And I don't know how many seasons I have left to keep reacting." Leclerc didn't say anything at first. but the subtle clench of his jaw said he felt the same way. They both knew what it meant to chase greatness. They both knew what it cost. And neither of them was willing to settle for mediocrity, not in the twilight of their respective careers. As the sun dipped below the paddock skyline, casting long shadows across the red and white banners of the Scuderia, two of Formula One's most accomplished drivers sat in the heart of Maranello's legacy, quietly contemplating how to resurrect it before it was too late. The two stood in silence, not out of comfort, but tension, a dense, uncomfortable pause that stretched longer than either of them had intended. Leclerc, arms folded, gaze fixed on a random point across the garage floor, looked like he was mentally fighting through a storm of conflicting thoughts. Hamilton, meanwhile, remained seated on the edge of the table near the telemetry station, helmet still perched beside him like a monument to frustration. The hum of nearby cooling units, the faint buzz of walkie-talkie chatter, and the distant clatter of wheel guns breaking down the other side of the garage filled the void between them. Minutes passed like hours before Leclerc finally exhaled, a heavy breath betraying his weariness and thinly veiled worry. "We need to get this sorted before Spa," he muttered, eyes now on Hamilton, voice low but firm, each word delivered like a carefully calibrated message meant to land without sparking another fire. "If it keeps going like this, we're going to be swallowed by the midfield." Hamilton didn't answer immediately. He stared at the tablet screen in front of him, watching as data traces looped and overlapped. Throttle traces, brake pressure, tire temps, all numbers that should have told a story of progress. But they didn't. Not today. Not after what had happened on track between them. A defensive move too aggressive, a strategy call gone ignored, radio messages that sounded more like warnings than updates. There had been a flashpoint, an overtake into turn 12 where they had nearly collided, and it had left both cars compromised, one limping to P6, the other fuming in P8. No celebration. No debrief worth calling constructive. Hamilton eventually stood, slowly, almost mechanically. He picked up his helmet and stared at it as if it too held some answers. "You think I don't see that?" he said at last, his voice calm but edged with frustration. "You think I don't know we're slipping backwards? But I can't drive two cars at once. I can't call strategy for myself and for you. If we're not going to act like a team, we're going to get eaten alive. And frankly right now, it feels like I'm driving with my mirrors more than my instincts, because I'm watching out for you instead of trusting you." Leclerc didn't flinch. But his jaw tightened, a flicker of guilt or defensiveness flashing across his face. "You cut across me into turn 12. There was space, yes, but you didn't even check. That's not how this is supposed to work." Hamilton stepped forward, now face to face with his teammate. "And where were you in turn 8? Holding me up. Again. How many laps were you on old tires while I was boxed in behind you because the pit wall was asleep at the wheel?" The air between them now felt like it could snap. Around them, engineers moved like ghosts, clearly sensing the gravity of the exchange but trained to pretend they weren't listening. The communication breakdown wasn't just on the track, it had infiltrated the garage, the strategy meetings, even the briefings with senior leadership. Tension had become part of the protocol. Every glance, every silence, every missed radio message, evidence of a team in internal disarray. As the day began to wind down, the orange-pink light of sunset reflecting off the paddock hospitality units and the air taking on the metallic scent of burned rubber and brake dust, the garage slowly transitioned into teardown mode. Mechanics began disassembling the cars, removing bodywork, scanning brake ducts, logging damage reports. The paddock lights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows over the scuffed pit lane concrete. Lando Norris, across the way in the McLaren setup, looked every bit the rising star, fresh-faced, joking with his engineers, giving thumbs up to fans who leaned over the barriers for photos. He had finished on the podium again, and the contrast was jarring. In the Ferrari camp, however, the vibe was anything but celebratory. Matteo Binotti's replacement, now in his third month as team principal, stood quietly with arms crossed at the back of the garage, eyes narrowed, no clipboard, no iPad, just watching. Taking it all in. The look on his face said it all. Something was broken, and it wasn't just a wing end plate. Hamilton walked over to the engineer's briefing area, still in full race gear, unzipped suit hanging around his waist, gloves clutched in one hand. He didn't sit. He didn't even speak. He just hovered, scanning data sheets spread across the table, occasionally glancing at the large screen still displaying lap delta overlays. Across the garage, Leclerc had retreated into his own bubble, sitting with his head down, towel draped over his shoulders, face hidden from the cameras that were already starting to gather, sniffing for post-race drama. The elephant in the room wasn't just a strategic disagreement. It was philosophical, cultural, deep-rooted. One driver, Leclerc, was the golden child, brought up in red, the heir apparent to Ferrari's future. The other, Hamilton, was the 7-time champion brought in to restore order, inject excellence, and chase legacy. But legacy was not a solo mission. And Ferrari, a team long known for politics as much as performance, was beginning to fracture under the weight of its own expectations. Behind closed doors, team meetings were becoming more heated. Technical staff had started to splinter into allegiances, some loyal to Leclerc's long-term vision, others gravitating toward Hamilton's demand for accountability and results. Whispered conversations in the hospitality suite were now laced with suspicion. Even the marketing department had begun preparing contingencies for a potential branding pivot, should the driver dynamic prove irreparably toxic. At the center of it all was the car, fast but fragile. Brilliant in sectors, disastrous in others. The SF-25 was a machine of contradictions, much like the team itself. In the right conditions, it could challenge for wins. But with the wrong calls, the wrong chemistry, or even the wrong timing on a pit stop, it could just as easily vanish into the anonymity of P7. As the final mechanics packed away the wheel guns and sealed the transport containers, Hamilton finally made a move toward the exit, pausing just once to glance back. Leclerc was still in his chair, unmoved, statue-like. For a second, it looked like he might say something. But no words came. Only a subtle nod. Not of agreement, perhaps just acknowledgement. Whatever resolution might eventually come, if any, one thing had become clear to everyone watching. Fans, journalists, and rival teams alike. The relationship between these two titans had changed. It had evolved, or devolved, into something delicate, dangerous, and potentially unsalvageable. The chemistry that once held promise of dominance now teetered on the brink of collapse. And somewhere in the heart of the Ferrari garage, beneath the data screens, behind the calm voices of PR handlers, past the locked doors of the strategy room, a storm was brewing. Not just about pace, not just about results, but about identity, trust, cohesion, and the very foundation upon which their championship hopes had been built.